Thwack! The sharp sound of a slap echoed, cutting through the bustling atmosphere of the shopping mall. Conversations abruptly ceased. All eyes turned to the two women standing in the middle of the luxury store. Aisha, a woman of color nearing 40, blinked, feeling the searing heat spread across her cheek. Facing her, Susan, a middle-aged woman in a power suit, stood erect, her lips curled into a defiant sneer. No one uttered a word. No one intervened. But they had all witnessed it. Aisha slowly lowered her hand, her gaze unwavering, showing no sign of fear. She wasn't surprised by the slap, but by Susan's sheer audacity, the belief that she could act with such impunity. Before we delve into this story, please tell us where you're watching from. Share your city or country name in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. Tomorrow, we will bring you another inspiring story tailored just for you. Susan smirked, her eyes gleaming with contempt. Did you think you could look at me like that without consequence? Aisha did not reply, but her gaze remained unflinching. It was a typical Saturday afternoon, the mall buzzing with the energy of weekend shoppers. High-end stores were packed, everyone eager to snag the latest fashion or snag a bargain. The atmosphere was more relaxed than usual. Aisha, a woman of color nearing 40, had only a short window before her lunch appointment. She navigated swiftly through the gleaming displays, her focus solely on the task at hand: make a few purchases and leave. Little did she know the confrontation that was about to unfold. Aisha was passing by a designer boutique, minding her own business, when she suddenly felt a hard shove against her shoulder. She stumbled slightly, but regained her balance. Instinctively, she looked up at the person who had bumped into her. Standing before her was Susan, a middle-aged woman around 45, clad in a power suit and designer heels. Her face was contorted with annoyance, as if she had just been deeply offended. "I'm sorry," Aisha began, her voice calm yet firm, attempting to defuse the situation from the outset. She hadn't intentionally bumped into the woman, but accidents were inevitable in crowded places. Susan's eyes narrowed, her jaw clenched. "You did that on purpose," she hissed, her voice dripping with condescension. Her eyes raked over Aisha, assessing her with unmistakable disdain, as if she were somehow superior. Aisha blinked, taken aback by the sudden hostility. "I didn't," she said, stepping back slightly. "I was just trying to pass by." Susan folded her arms, a smug smirk spreading across her face. "Typical of your kind, always acting like the world owes you something," she advanced, closing the distance between them. Aisha felt her heart rate quicken, but she didn't flinch. "I meant no harm," Aisha repeated, her tone unwavering. "Let's be civil." Susan wouldn't have it. "Oh, I see. Playing the good little colored woman, are we? You think I'll let you get away with whatever you want?" Her voice dripped with contempt, each word sharp and accusatory. She seemed oblivious to Aisha's attempts at an olive branch. She had decided that Aisha was the problem. Before Aisha could react, Susan's hand lashed out with alarming speed, connecting with her cheek in a sharp slap. The sound reverberated through the air, sending a jolt of electricity through Aisha's body. The sting of the slap was searing, but what truly shook Aisha was the sheer audacity of the act, the assumption of entitlement. It wasn't just a physical blow, but a statement. Susan felt she could do this, and Aisha would have to endure it. The surrounding crowd fell silent, a few casting nervous glances at the escalating confrontation. Some muttered under their breath, but no one intervened. Aisha's eyes burned, but she didn't react. She wouldn't give Susan the satisfaction of seeing her lose control in anger. The pain from the slap was sharp, but Aisha refused to show it. She stood motionless for a long moment, letting the moment stretch, feeling the sting on her skin morph into something deeper. Her hands twitched at her sides, but she kept them clenched. Aisha was not one to react in anger. She knew better than anyone the power of silence in these situations. She took a deep breath, composed herself. "I don't know what you think you're doing," Aisha said softly, her voice calm but firm enough to give Susan pause. "But what you just did was wrong." Susan's lip curled into a sneer. "Oh, really? You think you can get away with playing the martyr? I'm not some charity case, so don't play the victim, honey. You're not fooling anyone." She jabbed a finger at Aisha, her words meant to cut deep, to shame and subdue. "You people always find a reason to act like you're entitled." Aisha held her ground. "You can say whatever you want," she said, her tone laced with authority. "But that doesn't change the fact that you assaulted me. It doesn't change the fact that what you just did is unacceptable." Susan's nostrils flared as her anger surged, her face flushing an unnatural red. She stepped closer to Aisha, chin lifted as if daring her to say more. "I won't apologize for speaking the truth," Susan spat, her voice dripping with venom. "You're just looking for a reason to make everything about race. I don't even know why you're still standing here trying to play this game." Aisha remained calm. Her heart was pounding, but not from fear or shock. No, it was the rush of adrenaline, the sharp awareness that this moment was about more than a slap. It was about something much larger. It was about holding people accountable, making sure they understood that their racist attitudes wouldn't go unchecked. Aisha remained composed even as Susan's racial slurs and insults continued to flow. She made no move to react physically. Instead, she retrieved her phone from her purse, deliberately pressing the record button. The device lit up with the subtle sound of recording commencing, capturing every word, every slur, every insult Susan hurled her way. Susan's eyes locked onto the phone, her expression shifting for a split second. She hesitated, as if weighing her options, but the anger within her burned hotter than the shame of being recorded. "You think I care about your little recording?" Susan scoffed. Then, in a renewed surge of fury, she raised her hand again, aiming for Aisha's face once more. "You'll regret this," she snarled, her voice thick with hate, utterly blind to the fact that her behavior was spiraling out of control. The crowd was now abuzz with nervous murmurs, sensing that this confrontation would not end without further escalation. But Aisha was ready. She didn't flinch, didn't waver, didn't even step back. Instead, she met Susan's gaze with a singular, unwavering look that spoke volumes. And just as Susan's hand was about to strike, someone else stepped in. As Susan's hand hung in the air, poised for another slap, Aisha's body language remained unchanged. She stood firm, her posture unyielding, as if bracing herself for a storm. But this time, instead of flinching or raising her hands in defense, Aisha did something unexpected. Her voice was low but sharp, calm but unyielding. "You don't want to do that," Aisha said, her eyes locking with Susan's for a brief moment. Susan paused, her hand hovering in midair. The words seemed to hang in the space between them, and she hesitated, unsure of what was happening. It wasn't the cowardice or defensiveness she was used to seeing in those she targeted. There was a quiet, undeniable authority in Aisha's voice. Susan's confidence wavered just enough for Aisha to continue, her words measured but carrying the weight of someone who had nothing to fear. "I am Aisha Caldwell," she said, the words rolling off her tongue with an ease as if she had spoken them 1,000 times. "I am the Chief of Internal Affairs for the Silverstone Police Department." The mention of the police department seemed to have an effect on Susan. Her eyes darted, as if trying to place the name, but Aisha didn't let up. "I've overseen investigations into hate crimes, racial profiling, and corruption within law enforcement. Your actions could become the focus of a formal inquiry." The words landed like a bombshell. Susan's mouth gaped as the weight of Aisha's identity sank in. Her eyes shifted from anger to confusion, then disbelief. Aisha was no longer just some woman she could bully. She was a police officer, someone with the power to bring the full force of justice down on her. Susan blinked, clearly struggling to process the information. "Internal affairs," she repeated incredulously, as if trying to convince herself it wasn't true. "What the hell? Who cares about you?" But Aisha didn't waver under the question. Her face remained impassive as she stared at Susan, standing as still as a force of nature. "It means I oversee police misconduct. I investigate officers who think they're above the law." She tilted her head slightly, adding, "And now, I'm going to investigate you." Susan's face contorted, the anger still simmering beneath her skin. There was no hint of remorse in her eyes, only a desperate defiance. She wasn't finished. The realization that Aisha held power over her didn't extinguish her hostility. If anything, it seemed to fuel it. With a flick of her wrist, Susan's hand lashed out again, but this time it wasn't aimed at Aisha's face. She flailed wildly, her palm aiming for Aisha's shoulder, as if trying to throw her off balance. But Aisha was prepared. She didn't even flinch. The crowd around them shifted uneasily, some stepping back in fear, others watching the drama unfold in stunned silence. Susan's futile attempt to strike again was met with a calm, deliberate response. Aisha raised one hand, easily intercepting Susan's wrist midair, her fingers tightening like a vice. "No," Aisha said firmly, shaking her head. "You're done." The tension in the air was now palpable, like the stillness before a storm. Susan's breath came in ragged gasps as she tried to wrench her arm free, but Aisha didn't budge. "This is over, Susan," Aisha added, her voice unwavering, the finality in her tone leaving no room for argument. The flashing lights outside were a welcome sight to the crowd gathered around the confrontation. Mall security, alerted to the escalating tension, had called for backup, and the police arrived just in time to witness Susan's failed attempt to strike Aisha once more. The officers, familiar with internal affairs and its role in investigating police misconduct, knew exactly who Aisha was, and they knew better than to question her authority. As the officers approached, Aisha deliberately stepped back, releasing Susan's wrist but maintaining a resolute demeanor. She didn't need to do any more. The police could see what had transpired. The officers exchanged a quick glance, a silent understanding passing between them. They were well aware of the gravity of the situation. Susan, on the other hand, didn't know what to do with herself now. Her face was flushed with anger, but underneath, there was something darker, panic. She realized she was no longer in control. "You're under arrest for assault," one of the officers said, his voice steady but stern, "and for racially motivated harassment. We have witnesses who saw everything." Susan's mouth opened, but no words came out. Initially, she was in shock, scrambling for a way out of the mess she had created. She tried to smooth down her hair, as if that could somehow make her look calmer, more in control. "No, no," she stammered. "This is a misunderstanding. She provoked me, she..." Her words were cut short as the officer stepped forward, placing a hand on her arm and guiding her towards the patrol car. "You have the right to remain silent," he continued, his voice flat and professional. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Susan's eyes flashed with hatred as she glared at Aisha, her face contorted in disbelief. "This isn't over. You'll regret this," she spat, her tone venomous. But Aisha didn't flinch. She didn't even acknowledge the threat. She had done her part. The officers were doing theirs, leading Susan away, and the crowd was starting to disperse, murmurs of what had just happened spreading among them. Aisha stood silently, watching the officers handle the situation with a quiet satisfaction. She hadn't just let the moment pass. She had taken control, and now Susan would pay the price. Despite Susan's attempts to maintain her defiance, there was no escaping the inevitable consequences. Aisha had spoken her truth, and now it was time for justice to run its course. The crowd had witnessed the entire ordeal, but Aisha was the victor when the police car finally disappeared from view. Aisha's posture relaxed, but her resolve remained. She had just taken a small step in holding someone who thought they were above the law accountable. Her message was clear. No one was untouchable, not even a woman who thought she could use her privilege to trample over others. And as Aisha walked away, she couldn't help but feel a quiet sense of pride. Today, justice had prevailed. The clang of the iron prison door echoed through the empty hallway as it slammed shut behind Susan. She stood there for a long moment, eyes wide with disbelief as the cold steel bars loomed before her. The hands that once gripped the wheel of an expensive car, adorned with designer gloves, now fidgeted nervously at her sides. Susan was no longer in control. The comfortable life she had taken for granted was now slipping away, replaced by the stark reality of a small, dimly lit cell. She paced the floor, her heels clicking on the concrete, her thoughts a jumbled mess. Susan refused to accept the reality of her situation. The injustice she felt from Aisha, the frustration that had erupted into that fateful slap, all seemed justified in her mind. In Susan's world, there was always someone else to blame. People like Aisha were overly sensitive. They misconstrued her actions, twisted them into something they weren't. She wasn't racist, she couldn't be. She had always been in control, always able to manipulate her surroundings, her status. But now, in this cramped space, surrounded by women who didn't care about her social standing, her illusions of superiority were crumbling. Susan's days began to blur together, the cacophony of voices from neighboring cells merging into a low hum, a constant reminder that she was no longer alone in her bubble of privilege. One of the first things she noticed was how quickly her power had vanished. In the outside world, she was the speaker, and others listened. Here, no one cared about her titles, her wealth, or her self-righteousness. Her words fell on the ears of fellow inmates who saw her not as someone deserving of respect, but as just another person confined for their actions. Her interactions with the other inmates became a daily challenge. Some of the women were silent, keeping to themselves, but others were far more forthright, confronting her with the questions Aisha had raised. "Why did you hit her?" one woman asked, her voice laced with curiosity but no malice. Susan sneered, her pride still intact. "She provoked me. You don't know her like I do. She deserved it." But the woman didn't back down. "You're lying. You hit her because she was different from you. You think you're better? Think you can hit people and get away with it?" Susan's jaw clenched. She wanted to lash out, but the reality of her situation dawned on her. These weren't people she could intimidate. The woman's eyes bored into hers, unwavering. The conversation ended with Susan muttering an insult and walking away, but it was clear that a seed of doubt had been planted. As time passed, Susan's mind began to shift, though she would never admit it to herself. The walls of the prison weren't just confining her body, they were beginning to constrict her way of thinking. Each interaction, each challenge to her beliefs, chipped away at the walls of superiority she had built around herself. Gradually, the reality of her racism, the deeply unsettling truth about how she had treated Aisha, began to fester in her gut. But it was too late. Susan had made her choices, and now she would have to live with the consequences. Day after day, the cold concrete beneath her feet, the flickering fluorescent lights above her head, these became her new world. In the silence of her cell, she had no one to validate her racist views, no one to tell her she was right, that she was justified. Gradually, like a parasite, her hatred began to rot inside her, no longer fed by the outside world but festering in the dark corners of her mind. Outside the prison, Aisha continued her work, laser-focused on the mission she had undertaken years ago. As Chief of Internal Affairs, her job was not just about investigating officers, but about ensuring that justice was not selective, that those in power could not escape accountability. And when it came to Susan, Aisha didn't waver. The legal process was long but meticulous. Every piece of evidence, Susan's recorded outbursts, witness testimonies, and physical proof of the assault were carefully cataloged and presented. Susan was charged with multiple counts: assault, hate speech, and public harassment. Her trial was not a spectacle, but a stark reminder of the importance of accountability in every corner of society. Aisha ensured that Susan faced the consequences she had evaded her entire life. She could no longer use her privilege to avoid confronting the truth about her actions. In the courtroom, the final verdict was clear. Susan was sentenced to prison, not just for assaulting Aisha, but for the larger issues she represented, a society still plagued by prejudice and the abuse of power. It wasn't just about one woman's actions, but about sending a message. No one, no matter how wealthy or privileged, was beyond the reach of justice. Back in her office, Aisha sat at her desk, the weight of the day's work behind her. She looked out the window, her mind clear. The justice she had fought for was not about revenge, but about creating a world where this kind of behavior would not be tolerated, where people like Susan could not hide behind their privilege. But as Aisha's eyes fell back onto the stacks of paperwork on her desk, she couldn't help but feel a quiet satisfaction. She had made a difference, not just in one woman's life, but for countless others who had suffered the same hatred, the same discrimination, and the same injustice. For Aisha, today was not just a personal victory, but a triumph for everyone who had ever felt the sting of racism. Conversely, Susan remained trapped behind bars, a prisoner of her own beliefs. Her sense of superiority had rotted within the cramped confines of her cell, her racist ideals festering in a place where no one could cheer her on or tell her she was right. The walls had closed in on her, just as the legal system had closed in on her actions. She was no longer a figure of power. She was just another inmate left to face the consequences of her choices. Aisha had ensured that, and in doing so, she hadn't just righted a wrong. She had sent a message that no one was untouchable, that racism would not be allowed to thrive unchecked, whether on the streets, in the courtroom, or behind prison walls. And as Aisha closed her office door at the end of the day, she couldn't help but smile, knowing that the seeds of racial justice had been planted, and they were beginning to sprout. Today's story is a powerful reminder of courage, resilience, and accountability. If you were in Aisha's position, how would you have reacted? Have you ever faced injustice and had to stand up for yourself? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your voice could inspire many others. If you found this story meaningful, don't forget to share it with your friends and family to spread the message of justice and respect. Every small action we take can make a big difference. Thank you for watching and joining us. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next stories. See you tomorrow with another inspiring tale. Stay strong and successful. Thank you for supporting the channel. Please like, share, and subscribe for the latest updates. These stories are collected from various sources and do not represent any individuals or organizations. They are shared to spread humanistic values in life and have been rewritten with the assistance of AI. If there are any errors, please excuse them with understanding. Wishing you all the best in life.